Welcome to Popup Advice, the place where masters of entrepreneurship, leadership, and e-commerce reveal their secret tips and tricks for becoming the top dogs in their field. These candid conversations will give you exclusive strategies that turn your good idea into a great success. Let's dive in. I am just really excited about this conversation I recently had with Meg Nimigon, who is a team synergy coach helping modern companies build remote culture. In this episode, we talk about everything from the challenges to the solutions to the statistics that show just how important developing a rich culture is, especially for remote team performances. So without any more delay, let's hear from Meg.
Hey everyone, I'm Meg Nimigon, as was mentioned by Sav, and I'm a team synergy coach. So I help remote and hybrid teams build dreamy team culture. I also do one-on-one coaching with new age leaders who are looking to equip themselves to help them thrive in the new world of work.
So in your experience, Meg, what role does culture play in the overall team performance? I mean, why is culture even something we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the stats are there. So research shows that strong team culture can increase performance by 20 to 30%. And according to one organizational health index survey, companies with the strongest team culture actually perform 200% better than those in the bottom quartile. But, when most people think of team culture, they really think of the perks, right? Like these cool offices, the yoga, the 4-day work week. But what team culture really is the small interactions between people and what's accepted in a culture and what's celebrated. And it's that sort of shared through line of what the work is, how it's executed, and why it matters to people. So when we think about why is team culture important, what role does it play in performance? It's everything, right? So we're human beings, we're social creatures. So if we don't feel safe in an environment, then we won't take risks. If we don't feel valued and appreciated, we just won't push ourselves. Or if we're confused or we're disconnected from one another, we'll check out, right? We'll spend our time looking at different jobs or complaining to our friends. So culture is really that connection, that synergy between people that helps them work more effectively together. But to me, it's also the foundation where teams can really innovate. And with things moving so rapidly and changing so rapidly, having a strong team culture is so important for teams to be able to adapt to those changes effectively.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I love how you say it's that foundational aspect of giving people the courage and confidence to go out and create, especially in the landscape we're dealing with now. Being innovative and adaptive is very important. In talking of those small interactions, what is the number one challenge that you're seeing remote companies face in trying to integrate culture when they can't physically be in the same room?
Because a lot of companies actually moved to remote or hybrid because of the pandemic, what happened was we saw a lot of people's in-office culture get translated into the online space and people expecting that to play out and to work. And so maybe the technology was put in place, but the culture wasn't there. And so when people expected it to be there and it wasn't, people have now adopted this mindset that it's just really hard to build team culture online, or that you can't actually have strong relationships in a remote setting. And so I think that's why we're starting to see a lot of companies start pull people back into the office thinking this is the only way, right? But leading and managing in a remote culture and a remote context does actually take a shift in mindset, and it does really take some intention to set up and to create. I think it's actually a lot more possible than people think. I think sometimes it's just that mindset shift of this is possible from it's not possible. And I think it's more than worth it when we look at the benefits to remote work and just where we're heading and the new workforce and what people want and value. I think some of the challenges here are that people are just not slowing down and they're not engaging their team and actually intentionally creating a culture for a remote landscape. And now when we think about it, we've been living in this setting for a couple of years, right? So if we don't actually take the time to figure out exactly what is working and what's not, and what people even want in a team culture, then people are just sort of flailing a little bit and they're not designing a team culture that people feel connected to and where everybody's on the same page. And so that's where I come in and I help teams and leaders execute that.
And that's such a good point. I mean, who is actually responsible for building the culture in a company? Is it something we should leave exclusively in the hands of HR or our leaders, or does it kind of transcend its responsibility to everyone on the team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think team culture belongs to everybody. I think it's something that we all impact because we're this complex, moving, living organism together, right? But I do believe that it has to start at the top. And so when I say start at the top, I don't mean that like the leadership and the HR team sit in a room and decide how to implement solutions from the top down. The leadership has to be the ones that create the space and create the commitment and the conditions to create that culture together, right? So what that looks like is putting resources towards it, putting time towards it, really listening and learning and adapting, and then supporting and upholding that culture. They say that culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior that a leader is willing to tolerate. And so if you don't invest and value and uphold the culture that people are committing to, if you don't follow those same rules, then we have a trust breakdown. And when we don't have trust, then everything just falls flat. You know, when I work with teams, we really do uncover like what are the things that are working, what aren't working, and how we all have a commitment and role to play in that. But that space has to be created by the leadership team.
Wow, for sure. I love that. So I think at this point, the audience has recognized the value of culture, how it contributes to team performances and some different challenges and integrations. So could you maybe list 3 ways that a company could improve their culture remotely today?
Yeah, like number 1, I would say find out how your team is actually doing. So in my team synergy program, what I do is I conduct one-on-one interviews with each member of the team anonymously. So I would really recommend get the facts on your people, because without that, we run the risk of actually solving the wrong problems, which is terrible, right? Because then we're actually spending our resources and our time on the wrong things. And so not only is that a waste of time and resources, but it's also, you know, grounds for actually more disconnection. Because if people feel like, man, they just don't get it, or like, you know, they don't even understand what we're going through, and people disconnect further, which is the opposite of what we want. I think the second thing would be to really, as I said, slow down and create time to make space for those connections. Team culture is made up of these small interactions between people. Therefore, relationships are your number 1. So find ways to slow the work down and create intentional time for connections. In my program, I run a workshop series that helps teams do that by building pathways for communication, for connection, for collaboration. I think the last thing I would say is invest in your leaders and in your managers and help them, because leading a team remotely actually takes a lot of like new skills, right? It takes self-trust, it takes self-confidence, it actually takes a lot of management and discipline in yourself and trying out new things and maybe failing along the way. And so my advice is not to just put all of that on your management team and just expect someone to succeed. So that's why I do one-on-one coaching, right? To help leaders and managers with the mindset shifts that are really needed in a remote context. And so that we avoid bringing in those old traditional office mindsets into the remote setting. So yeah, I think the 3 things really are just like get to know your team and their needs, build connections and trust across the team, and really just support your people and support your leadership.
And I think the pattern that I'm seeing in creating this remote culture, it requires an extra degree of intention, because like you said, you don't really have those like natural water cooler conversations that you can default on.
It's like, it's also good news, right? Because I think people think, as I said at the beginning, like it's a really hard thing, and it's not as scary as it's kind of made out to be, right? It kind of helps take that barrier away.
So in your experience working with all these different cultures, is there an ideal company culture, something that you would walk into and say, oh, these guys got it down packed?
My answer to that would be to ask your people, like ask the employees, and to look at your results. Don't look outside the company first. First, look at your people and ask yourself, like, how many people have gone on leave or left the company in the last year? How many people are working late? What's the overall energy on your team meetings, on your calls? How often are you putting out fires and like dealing with things? You know, how are things not being intentional and laid out? So it's like, do you really know how people are doing and what they need? I think a lot of us look to these outside, what are they doing? Oh, this company's trying this. And it's like, there is some pieces to that. Like there are definitely some great best practices and things we want to learn from, no doubt. But it's not a one size fits all model, right? We've got human beings and we're complex, we have emotions. So if you're looking outside somebody else's approach and trying to just put it on your people, A, they're just going to maybe feel irritated because it's like not right for them. And B, it just might not actually be what the team needs. Like I work with a lot of teams where the leader thinks that the team needs one thing or thinks the team is doing really well or not well, whatever it might be. And when it comes to doing the interviews and doing the workshop series, it's completely different, right? Because we all just make perceptions, especially remotely. When we just see people on Zoom, we're always creating stories in our minds. So what's an ideal company culture? Ask the people that work there. Are they happy? And then if they're not, look inward, get curious, be intentional, and support your people. Like the smallest changes that you can make to your people are going to have a massive effect on the results that they can create, right? Once you kind of have a good understanding of what the challenges really are, you'll know the gaps that you need to address. And from that point, find expertise and examples and things like that.
Yeah, you touched on something really interesting, our nature to be assumptive or to make up those stories. And so I think it's really important to have the conversation, be direct about it, and to really hear what is actually being said so that we're not just spinning a narrative in our minds. So just as we wrap up here, if you had to leave one piece of advice for any entrepreneur, anyone in a leadership position trying to improve their company culture, what would it be?
I would say don't expect it to happen on its own, because it will. It will build on its own, but it's likely not going to be the culture that is going to get you to where you want to go. And you'll likely lose a lot of people along the way. So that's just like not an effective way to get people on the same page, to have those clear communication strategies, to all the things that we know help make remote work cannot happen if culture is not intentional, right? It's very evident that we live in a very fast-paced work culture. And a lot of people don't want to slow down or put time and resources towards being intentional with it. That there's no bigger time waster or resource killer than having a poor team culture. So by not investing in it, what you are investing in is mistakes being made, like work quality not being where you want it to be, people missing deadlines, people being unhappy and stressed out and gossiping with one another, people not staying, which is a huge waste of time and resources. And then you, as the leader of the team or as the HR team, get stuck spending your time and energy putting out fires and jumping from one thing to the next. And you never get to put your attention into the places that matter most. So my advice is really like, don't put it off, and invest in your team culture will actually create more time and more money and more joy and better results. So that'd be my advice.
So for anyone who's wanting to connect with you, Meg, where's the best place for them to reach out and potentially access your services?
So people can find me on Instagram at Meg Nimigon. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you want to check out my website, it's www.megnimigon.com. You can find out all the details there about my program, and you can book a consult with me and we can get on the phone and just figure out, as I said, like every team is different. So on a consult, we can take time to really understand your team, where you're at, and exactly what we need to get your team where you want to go in the best way possible. So I look forward to meeting anybody who wants to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sav.